Internal emails that show Mayor Cantrell possibly crossed the ethical line. In one crime morning, the mayor arrived at 7:34 and left about an hour later in workout clothes, walking alone. At 9:11, she returned without police protection. He finally left the city-owned apartment at 11:04, 4 minutes after her first scheduled meeting of the day was supposed to start. But that morning, 4 law enforcement officers went on the clock. For that day, the city decided to pay officers to protect the mayor for 48 total hours of work. Let's go back to the night of September 7th. Vappy arrived at 5:15. The mayor more than an hour later. The two stayed at the Pantaba until after 11. So while Vappy and Cantrell spent time inside the city-owned apartment, the city paid 2 additional security officers to protect the mayor. The city won't detail what these officers do while on the clock. We reviewed more than 1,000 hours of video from a public security camera outside the city-owned French Quarter apartment and inspected hundreds of pages of payroll records and the mayor's schedule. What we found, the city paying NOPD officers to protect the mayor, but those officers spending many of those hours nowhere close to her. Monday, August 22nd of last year, Mayor Cantrell spent the entire day in Washington, D.C. for one meeting with the Department of Justice. Officer Jeffrey Vappy was the only security listed on her schedule that day and traveled to D.C. with the mayor. But back in New Orleans, the city still paid 2 additional officers to protect the mayor while she was in D.C., more than 1,000 miles away. Vappy has been removed from the mayor's security team following our stories of possible payroll fraud and an improper relationship with the mayor.
Homicides, assaults, robbery, and theft have all seen double-digit increase.
When you got to go to the gas station with your gun in your hip, when you got to go to the grocery store with your gun on your pocket, that's a war zone.
It's fruitless to try to hold a meeting to say you want to hold people accountable for crime.
In a city that lost 266 lives to violence last year.
I've had students living in their car with a parent and 4 children living in one vehicle. Without a decent education, then you can't get a good job. And without a good job, then you can't afford to pay for where you live or put food on the table. So I think everything starts and ends with education.
We spend all our money on tourism and other things instead of our citizens.
Ashana Brigard says city leaders need to stop blaming the children and start helping them.
Let me get this straight. Living in a car, being depressed, being stressed out, not having food to eat is not an excuse? Well, then if that's not an excuse, what is? How am I gonna pay $2,000 of rent, $500 for electricity, and $750 for eggs while making $10 an hour at Walmart? That's not even possible.
We want to examine the elements of a rich zip code and a poor zip code in Louisiana. The rich zip code is home to 177 separate industries. It produces $5.3 billion in economic activity each year, higher than the GDP of 40 countries. Now, I want to remind you, I'm not talking about a state, I'm not talking about a region, I'm talking about a zip code. Now, let's look at the poor zip code. 38.1% of residents live in poverty, median household income of $21,000, highest unemployment rate, highest murder rate, the second highest incarceration rate, and the lowest life expectancy. And guess what? This is the same zip code, 70805. Infant mortality, Louisiana ranks 46. 49th for poverty, 47th for household income, 47th for food insecurity, 50th in income gap by gender, 47th for property crimes, 46th for violent crimes, 48th for reading scores. Louisiana ranks 49th for math scores and 48th for life expectancy. U.S. News and World Report, we are 50th, dead last in the country.
If Louisiana is so rich, why is it that we are so poor? This is a graph of all the corporate subsidies per capita for every state. There's Louisiana, the big red line. We are spending $2,857 per capita in corporate subsidies. And about 80% of that is going to the industrial tax exemption program. Louisiana is the only state in the nation that is giving a state-level board the authority to grant tax exemptions for local entities' property taxes. So the dollars that should be going to the Metro Council, to the school board, to the police, it's a state-level board made up of people across Louisiana going into a boardroom and saying yes or no. Here's a chart of all the requests in the last 20 years. The little tiny line is who's been rejected. The approval rate has been 99.95%. There's been no cost-benefit analysis done in 82 years. ITEP is extremely expensive. I think we can all remember the drama of the film tax exemption program just a few years ago. This program costs 10 times more than the film tax credits. Just in 2017, $1.9 billion, billion with a B, was lost in revenue to local taxing bodies. $720 million was lost to Louisiana schools, 20% of their state and local funding. That's just in 1 year. First off, we have BASF in Ascension Parish. The red line is the section that they are not paying taxes on, and the green is what they are liable for. 73% of their property value is off the rolls. Also in Ascension Parish, we have Methanex. 99% is off the rolls. I don't think you can even see the little green sliver that they're paying taxes on. That is $7.5 million, or 1% of their total property value. In Caddo Parish, we have Calumet, 89% off the rolls, which is $502 million. In Cameron Parish, they have two multi-billion-dollar entities. Cameron LNG is worth $11.7 billion, and they are exempt from 99.99% of that. Also in Cameron Parish is an even larger facility, $12.8 billion, and once again, they are exempt from 98.9% of that. We have Calcasieu Parish with Westlake Chemical, 77% off the rolls. In Iberville with Shintech, 98.6 off the rolls. That's $1.84 billion. In Orleans Parish, we have Folgers. They are 69% off the rolls. In St. Bernard Parish with Chalmette Refining, 74% off the rolls. In Rapides Parish, Procter & Gamble, we've all heard of them, 70% off the rolls. West Baton Rouge with Dow, 95% off the rolls. In St. John the Baptist Parish, 88% off the rolls. This is another multi-billion-dollar facility. So across the state, between 66 and 99% of industrial property is perpetually exempted from property taxes. So local governments, they stand on three legs. Sales taxes, we're all very familiar with those. State and federal funds, and property taxes. When all of these corporations are exempted from their property taxes, we're chopping off a major portion of one of those legs. And without that, we are left massively unstable.